Sean Hannity finally tells his secret. There's something special about watching a guy who built his career on facts and tough debates suddenly talk about something deeply personal. Sean Hannity, one of America's most well-known voices in conservative media, just did that. At 63 years old, after decades of talking about politics, being on TV in prime time, and doing big interviews, Hannity opened up to talk about something way more human than politics or power. Love. His heartfelt confession about the woman he calls the love of my life didn't just shock fans. It made people see a softer side of a man they thought they already knew. But did they really? Sean Patrick Hannity was born in Queens, New York in 1961. He was the youngest of 4 kids in a tight-knit Irish-American family. His dad, Hugh, worked as a court officer, while his mom, Lillian, was a corrections officer at a county jail. It wasn't a fancy life, but it was one based on hard work and community. People who knew him as a kid say Sean had a stubborn side, the kind of determination that either drives parents nuts or leads to greatness later on. Growing up in Franklin Square, Long Island, he was just another neighborhood kid, doing odd jobs, cutting grass, and playing around with anything he could find. But it was the sound of radio that first grabbed his attention. Late at night, when most kids were sleeping, Hannity would listen to talk radio. He was amazed by how voices through a speaker could get the whole nation talking. By his early 20s, Hannity knew he didn't want a normal 9-to-5 job. He tried different jobs, construction, painting, even bartending. But his heart kept coming back to the idea of a microphone and an audience. His first real chance came when he got a volunteer job at a college radio station in California. It was small, rough, and didn't pay, but to Sean it was everything. From that tiny California station, Hannity moved to bigger places, eventually hosting shows in Alabama and Georgia. His never-give-up attitude caught the eye of producers who saw he could do more than just radio. By 1996, his life changed in an instant. Fox News, which was a new network trying to grow, picked him to co-host a new show with liberal commentator Alan Combs. The show Hannity and Combs became a huge hit. Viewers loved the tension, 2 different viewpoints clashing every night, and Hannity loved it. Years later, when the Sean Hannity Show started as his own program, his voice became one of the most recognized in America. He interviewed presidents, criticized policies, and sometimes caused controversy. But through it all, one thing stayed the same: his energy. Behind the camera, however, Hannity wasn't as loud. Friends and coworkers often say he was surprisingly quiet off air, someone who valued loyalty, privacy, and faith. The personality that America saw every night was the broadcaster. But the man off screen was deep in thought. To many who knew him, it was obvious that while Sean Hannity might love the chaos at work, what he truly wanted was peace in his personal life. Before the fame, before Fox News, Sean Hannity was just a young radio host trying to make it. And it was during those early years that he met the woman who would become a huge part of his life story, Jill Rhodes. Jill was a journalist working at a local newspaper in Huntsville, Alabama. When she first heard Hannity's voice on the radio, he would call her up for story ideas, and soon those work calls turned into personal ones. They were both young, driven, and eager to make their mark. There was a spark, one that quickly grew into something more. In 1993, they got married. It wasn't a fancy ceremony. It was simple, meaningful, and filled with hope from 2 people ready to face the world together. Hannity often gave Jill credit for being his anchor, the calm to his storm. As his career grew, so did their family. They welcomed their first child, a son named Patrick, in 1998. And 3 years later, their daughter Mary Kelly was born. People who knew Hannity during those years often saw a different side of him. The dad who came to tennis matches. The husband who made sure his family stayed close no matter how busy his schedule was. But being in the public always has a price. The long hours, the constant traveling, and the pressure of fame began to wear them down as Hannity's career took off. His marriage quietly started to crack around the edges. By 2019, after more than 20 years together, Sean and Jill decided to split up. The divorce was finished quietly without the drama or scandal that usually follows celebrity breakups. Even after the separation, Hannity and Rhodes continued to raise their kids together with amazing grace. Their kids stayed. Ainsley admired Sean's discipline, his dedication to his kids, and his faith. Sean admired her strength, her warmth, and her constant positivity. There was mutual respect. Co-workers began to notice. They often traveled in the same circles, sometimes showing up at events together. But even as whispers began to spread, both Hannity and Earhart stayed quiet. For Sean, that was on purpose. After living through the pressure of a public marriage, he wasn't eager to invite the world into his heart again. But people close to him noticed how different he seemed when Ainsley was around. He laughed more. He was lighter. Their shared values became the foundation of their bond, faith, family, and the belief that everything happens in its own time. They began to go to church together, often sitting quietly in the back. It wasn't flashy romance, no red carpets, no magazine covers, but it was real. They built a connection based on understanding rather than show. What drew them together wasn't opposites attracting, but similarities connecting. For Hannity, who had spent years shielding his emotions, this connection was healing. Then came a moment that changed everything. It wasn't during a political broadcast or a scripted interview. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple. Sean Hannity, known for his confidence, was speaking more softly than usual. His tone wasn't the booming certainty of a man defending his beliefs. It was the gentle honesty of someone revealing a truth he'd kept to himself for a long time. He began talking about being thankful, about the people who stand by you when life gets messy. Then his words turned personal. He mentioned finding someone who understood him, someone who had been there through the highs and lows, someone he called the love of my life. For a moment, the usually fiery host looked human, not the political commentator, not the media powerhouse, just a man at 63, acknowledging the beauty of second chances. Viewers were shocked. It wasn't that they didn't think Hannity had feelings. It was that they'd never seen him show them so openly. He had always kept that part locked away. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. People who had followed his journey knew exactly who he was talking about. And it wasn't just the words that made the moment powerful. It was the honesty, the pauses, the subtle smile when he said, at this stage in my life, I'm just grateful. I found someone who makes me better every single day. That line alone became a turning point, not just in how the public saw Sean Hannity, but in how he saw himself. Gone was the man who once hid behind his work. In his place stood someone who had lived long enough to know that real strength comes from being vulnerable. The confession spread far beyond his usual audience. Viewers who had followed him for years were caught off guard. There was no spin, just honesty. It was rare to see a man who built his career on being untouchable show that kind of tenderness. The media world reacted quickly. Some called it unexpected, others refreshing, and for many fans, it was humanizing. In an age when being real is rare, the moment reminded people that being vulnerable isn't weakness. For many supporters, it made them feel closer to him. At 63, he wasn't chasing reinvention. He was embracing reality, one filled with gratitude, companionship, and the quiet confidence that comes from being loved for who you are, not what you do. Sean Hannity's story isn't just about rediscovering love at an older age. It's about the courage to begin again. His confession came at 63, an age when many people think their story has already been written. Yet his journey shows that life continues to surprise us, that love doesn't have an expiration date, and that joy can show up long after the storm has passed. If there's one thing Hannity's confession made clear, it's that the human heart doesn't retire. It keeps hoping, keeps searching, and sometimes when the timing is finally right, it finds what it's been looking for all along. Love,